The crisp November air clung to the tarmac as the New York skyline faded into the distance. Onboard Flight 428, passengers settled into their seats, unaware of the cruel twist fate had in store. Families murmured quietly, businessmen tapped on laptops, and a child's laughter occasionally broke through the hum of the engines. It was a normal flight until it wasn't. Captain Lauren Hayes, a seasoned pilot with decades of experience, adjusted her headset as she spoke with air traffic control. "Climbing to flight level 330, she said, her voice steady and professional. Beside her, First Officer Will Carter checked the instruments, nodding in agreement. Everything appeared normal. But then it began. "Captain," Will said, his tone laced with uncertainty, "I'm picking up an unidentified signal. TCAS shows another aircraft in our airspace, but there's no visual." Lauren frowned, leaning forward to scan the radar. Air traffic control didn't mention any conflicting traffic. "Confirm with them." Will toggled the mic. "ADC, this is Flight 428. We're picking up an unidentified aircraft at our altitude. Can you confirm?" Static crackled over the radio, followed by a distorted voice. "Negative, Flight 428. No traffic in your vicinity. Maintain current heading." Lauren's unease deepened. "Keep an eye on it," she said, her fingers gripping the yoke tighter. Outside, the clouds thickened, and the bright sun above was quickly swallowed by an unnatural gray. In the cabin, Olivia Brooks, a journalist heading to a breaking news story, flipped through her notes. She glanced out the window, her brow furrowing as she noticed the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The light seemed wrong. Dimmer, as if the plane had flown into a shadow that wasn't there before. Suddenly, the plane shook violently, jolting passengers out of their calm. Gasps and murmurs filled the cabin as the fasten seatbelt sign blinked on. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lisa, the lead flight attendant, announced over the intercom, "please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We're experiencing unexpected turbulence." Unexpected was an understatement. The turbulence worsened, and outside the window, Olivia caught a glimpse of something she couldn't explain. A shadowy form darted through the clouds, moving with impossible speed. Her heart raced as she grabbed her phone to record. Back in the cockpit, alarms blared as the TAS warning system erupted. Traffic. Traffic. The radar showed the other aircraft's position, closing in fast. Lauren squinted into the dense clouds, her instincts screaming that something was horribly wrong. And then they saw it. Out of the swirling gray emerged a second plane, an older model Airbus A320. Its exterior was rusted and decayed, as if it had been abandoned for decades. But it wasn't empty. Shadows moved within the cockpit, and as the aircraft drew closer, Lauren could see faces pressed against its windows. Faces that didn't belong to the living. "What the?" Will's voice trailed off, his usual composure shattered. Lauren snapped into action. "Evasive maneuver, now." She yanked the yoke to the left, sending Flight 428 into a sharp bank. Passengers screamed as the plane tilted violently. Olivia's phone slipped from her grasp, tumbling to the floor as she clutched the armrest. "ATC, we have visual on an unidentified aircraft. It's..." Lauren hesitated, searching for the words. "It's not right." Requesting immediate guidance. The response was a chilling silence. The radio's static deepened, and a new voice emerged, low, guttural, and unmistakably otherworldly. "You cannot escape." The lights in the cockpit flickered, and a sudden, icy chill filled the air. Lauren and Will exchanged horrified glances. "What the hell is happening?" Will whispered. The ghostly Airbus surged forward, narrowly missing Flight 428 as it disappeared back into the clouds. But its presence lingered, an oppressive force that seemed to weigh down the aircraft. Lauren fought to stabilize the plane, her mind racing. This isn't turbulence. It's something else. In the cabin, Olivia retrieved her phone, her hands trembling as she reviewed the footage she had captured. The video showed nothing but swirling clouds, and yet, she could swear she saw those faces staring back at her. Lisa moved through the aisle, trying to calm the passengers, but her own fear was evident. "What's going on?" a man demanded, his voice shaking. "Is the plane going down?" Lisa shook her head, forcing a reassuring smile. "The pilots are handling it. Please remain seated." But deep down, she wasn't so sure. As the plane steadied, the ghostly hum that had filled the air seemed to fade, but the tension remained. Lauren's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered some unexpected weather conditions, but we are working to ensure your safety. Please remain calm." Her words offered little comfort. Olivia glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the ghostly plane return. Instead, she saw something far more unsettling, a faint, glowing light in the distance, pulsing like a heartbeat. She leaned closer, her breath fogging the glass. Whatever lay ahead, it wasn't part of the natural world. And Flight 428 was heading straight for it. The pulsing light in the distance grew brighter, casting an unnatural glow across the cabin. It flickered in a rhythmic pattern, almost like it was alive. Olivia stared out the window, transfixed. Her fingers hovered over her phone, the journalist in her desperate to document every detail, yet a deep sense of dread held her still. "We're getting closer," she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Beside her, an older woman clutched a rosary, whispering prayers under her breath. The tension in the cabin was palpable. In the cockpit, Lauren and Will struggled to maintain control. The instruments flickered erratically, as though the plane itself was rebelling against them. "Altitude's dropping again," Will called out, his voice edged with panic. Lauren tightened her grip on the yoke, her jaw clenched. "We need to get above this." Full throttle. The engines roared louder, but the plane barely climbed. It was as if an invisible force was holding them down. Lauren's eyes darted to the radar, where the faint outline of the ghostly Airbus reappeared. "It's back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The shadowy plane loomed on the screen, its position far too close for comfort. "ATC, this is Flight 428. We have visual on an unidentified aircraft. It's on a collision course." The response was the same as before, static, followed by the chilling, guttural voice. "You cannot escape." Will's hands trembled over the controls. "What do we do? We can't outrun it." Lauren's mind raced. "We're not outrunning anything. We're going to outmaneuver it." She yanked the yoke hard to the left, sending the plane into a sharp bank. Passengers screamed as the cabin tilted violently. Overhead compartments flew open, spilling luggage into the aisles. Olivia braced herself, gripping the seat in front of her as her phone slipped to the floor once again. "What is happening?" someone shouted from the back. Lisa, the flight attendant, struggled to stay on her feet as she tried to calm the panicked passengers. "Please remain seated. We're experiencing severe turbulence," she said, her voice shaking. But deep down, she knew this was far beyond turbulence. As the plane leveled out, Olivia snatched up her phone and turned on the camera. She pointed it toward the window, hoping to capture the ghostly aircraft. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness and swirling clouds. And then it appeared. The decayed Airbus emerged from the void, its windows glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. The shadows inside the cockpit moved again, and Olivia swore she saw a face, hollow eyes staring directly at her. Her breath hitched as she instinctively leaned back, nearly dropping her phone. "It's watching us," she whispered. Beside her, the older woman clutched her arm. "You saw it too, didn't you? The ghosts. They don't want us here." In the cockpit, Lauren and Will's battle continued. The instruments were useless, and the hum of the engines was now accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very air around them. "This plane, it's not just following us," Will said, his voice trembling. "It's controlling us." Lauren's eyes narrowed. "Not if I can help it." She took a deep breath, focusing on the controls. "Hold steady. We're climbing out of this." The engines roared louder as the plane began to ascend once more. The oppressive force pushed back, but Lauren held her ground. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead as she fought against the invisible weight dragging them down. In the cabin, the whispers began. Soft at first, like a faint breeze, but growing louder and more distinct. Passengers looked around in confusion and fear, their eyes darting to the empty spaces between the rows of seats. "Do you hear that?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking. Lisa nodded, her face pale. "It's coming from everywhere." The whispers coalesced into a single, haunting phrase, spoken in a voice that was both distant and all-encompassing. "Turn back. Or join us." The lights flickered violently, and the temperature in the cabin plummeted. Frost formed on the windows, and the passengers' breaths became visible in the freezing air. Olivia's heart raced as she scanned the faces around her. Some passengers sobbed quietly, while others clutched each other in terror. At the far end of the cabin, a shadow moved. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew darker and more defined with each passing second. A figure emerged, its hollow eyes glowing faintly as it stepped forward. Lisa froze, her breath catching in her throat. "It's here," she whispered. The cabin descended into chaos as the shadowy figure advanced, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the flickering light. Passengers screamed, their fear rippling through the cabin like a tidal wave. Lisa stood frozen in the aisle, her mind racing for an explanation, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this. "Stay calm," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Please stay in your seats." But calm was impossible. The air was thick with dread, the whispers now a chorus of unearthly voices. Olivia clutched her phone, the camera still recording as she turned toward the cockpit. Her journalistic instinct screamed at her to document everything, but the terror clawing at her chest made her hesitate. In the cockpit, Lauren and Will fought against an invisible force. The yoke resisted their every move, as though the plane itself were alive and intent on defying them. Lauren's voice was steady but strained. "We're losing altitude again. Will, give me full thrust." Will's hands trembled as he adjusted the throttle. "It's not responding. Engines are at max, but we're still dropping." Lauren's eyes darted to the radar. The ghostly Airbus was back, its decayed fuselage visible through the swirling clouds. But now it was closer, too close. Shadows moved within its cockpit, and she could swear she saw them watching her. "Damn it. We're not going to let this thing take us down," Lauren muttered, her knuckles white on the controls. "Will, switch to manual override." Will hesitated. "That's a risk. If we lose power..." "We've already lost control," Lauren snapped. "Do it." He nodded, flipping the override switches. The plane jolted violently, throwing passengers forward in their seats. The lights dimmed further, casting eerie shadows across the cabin. Olivia turned her camera back to the aisle, where the shadowy figure now loomed over Lisa. "What do you want?" Lisa demanded, her voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes unblinking. Then, it spoke, not with a voice, but with a presence that filled the entire cabin. "You do not belong here." Passengers screamed again, some collapsing into sobs while others clutched one another. Olivia felt the weight of the words pressing down on her chest, as if the air itself were pushing her into her seat. Lisa stumbled backward, her hands shaking. "We're just trying to get home. Please let us go." The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the cockpit. "Turn back. Or you will join us." In the cockpit, the temperature plummeted. Frost crept across the instruments, and both Lauren and Will could see their breath in the frigid air. "This is impossible," Will muttered, his voice barely audible over the alarms. "Focus," Lauren snapped. "We're not done yet." The radar pinged wildly, showing the ghostly Airbus circling them like a predator. Lauren tightened her grip on the yoke, her mind racing for a solution. "We need to gain altitude. Get above the storm." Will nodded, adjusting the flaps. "If the engines hold." "They will," Lauren said, though her voice lacked conviction. In the cabin, the whispers grew louder, transforming into a deafening roar. Olivia pressed her hands over her ears, her phone clattering to the floor. The shadowy figure disappeared, but its presence lingered, an oppressive weight that seemed to sap the very hope from their hearts. Lisa stumbled toward Olivia, her face pale. What are they? What do they want? Olivia shook her head. I don't know. But we need to keep recording this. People need to know what happened here. Lisa hesitated, then nodded. Just be careful. Suddenly, the plane jolted again, and a blinding light filled the cabin. Passengers shielded their eyes, their screams drowned out by a deafening hum. Lauren and Will braced themselves as the controls seized up completely. We're losing power, Will shouted. Lauren's heart pounded.
No.
Not yet.
Hold on.
The light outside the cockpit grew brighter, engulfing the plane in an otherworldly glow. The ghostly Airbus loomed ahead, its shadowy figures now visible through every window. Lauren gritted her teeth, her mind racing. Whatever happens, we don't stop fighting. The hum reached its peak, and the plane lurched violently as if pulled by an unseen force. Lauren's grip tightened on the yoke, her voice resolute. We're not going down. Not today. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the light vanished, leaving the cabin in darkness. The cabin remained eerily dark, the oppressive silence broken only by the ragged breathing of the passengers. For a moment, it was as if the world outside the plane had ceased to exist. Then, the hum began again, low and menacing, vibrating through the fuselage. Lauren tightened her grip on the yoke, her knuckles white. We're still here, she muttered, her voice filled with determination. We're not giving up. Will adjusted the failing instruments, his fingers trembling. The engines are barely holding. We need a plan. Lauren's eyes darted to the radar, which now displayed the ghostly Airbus directly in front of them. It's trying to force us into its path, she said. But we're not going to let it. In the cabin, Olivia retrieved her phone from the floor, her hands shaking as she resumed recording. The passengers were huddled in their seats, some praying, others staring blankly ahead. Lisa moved through the aisles, offering quiet reassurances despite her own fear. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling the cabin with a cacophony of voices. Olivia winced, pressing her hands over her ears. It's everywhere, she whispered. We can't escape it. At the front of the plane, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the same ghostly presence that had appeared before, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. The passengers froze, their fear palpable as the figure raised a hand, pointing directly at Lauren in the cockpit. You have crossed the threshold, it intoned, its voice echoing through the cabin. You cannot return. Lauren's jaw tightened. We'll see about that. She yanked the yoke hard to the right, sending the plane into a sharp bank. The ghostly Airbus followed, its decayed structure glowing ominously in the dark skies. Lauren's mind raced as she fought to keep the plane steady. We need to break free, she said to Will. Whatever it's doing to us, we have to push through. Will nodded, his fear momentarily eclipsed by determination. We're losing power fast. It's now or never. In the cabin, Olivia focused her camera on the ghostly figure. What do you want? She asked, her voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes locking onto her. To join us, it replied. To become part of the void. Olivia's breath hitched. Why us? What did we do? The figure did not answer. Instead, it faded into the shadows, leaving the cabin in an even deeper darkness. Lauren's voice crackled over the intercom. Hold on, everyone. We're about to punch through this. The engines roared louder as she pushed the plane to its limits. The ghostly Airbus drew closer, its presence now overwhelming. Passengers screamed as the whispers grew into a deafening roar, the voices melding into a single, chilling command. Join us. Lisa clutched a seat for support, her eyes wide with terror. Captain, it's right on top of us. Lauren's hands were steady as she made her decision. We're not going to let it take us. Hold on tight. With a sudden burst of determination, she pulled the yoke upward, pushing the plane into a steep climb. The oppressive force fought back, dragging them downward, but Lauren refused to yield. The engines strained, their roar deafening as the plane climbed higher and higher. Then, with a blinding flash of light, the ghostly Airbus vanished. The whisper ceased, and the cabin was plunged into an almost deafening silence. The plane leveled out, the turbulence gone, and the instruments flickered back to life. Will exhaled shakily. "We're clear," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We're actually clear." Lauren slumped back in her seat, her hands still gripping the controls. "We're not clear until we land," she said, though her voice held a note of relief. In the cabin, the passengers looked around, their expressions a mixture of confusion and hope. Olivia lowered her phone, her hands still shaking. "What just happened?" she whispered. Lisa approached her, her voice quiet. "I don't know. But whatever it was, it's over." Olivia glanced out the window. The storm clouds had cleared, revealing a calm, star-filled sky. But even as she stared into the endless expanse, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. The plane continued its journey, the hum of the engines the only sound in the cabin. Lauren's voice came over the intercom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've cleared the turbulence and are back on course. Please remain seated as we prepare for our descent." The passengers cheered softly, their relief palpable. But for Olivia, Lisa, Lauren, and Will, the experience had left an indelible mark. They had crossed a threshold few ever would, or could. As Flight 428 descended toward its destination, a faint glow appeared on the horizon. Olivia watched it intently, her heart pounding. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but she knew it was there. The ghostly Airbus was still out there, waiting, watching, and ready to claim its next passengers.